Thanks, Sally, who was instrumental in helping me put this panel together. And what a panel we have. Previous panels have been described as superb. I will let you come up with a much better adjective after the panel, okay? So this panel is the ATSE panel, the Academy of Science, Technology and Science, and we are celebrating 50 years in ATSE, yes? And David Cook, who's out there right at the back, he always likes to just blend in, has been a fellow for 35 of that 50. He's also been the gatekeeper to the fellowship, and he's done a really good job. He let his guard down when I got in. So our panel will focus on AI in practice, and we have 3 extraordinary panelists who are going to share their actionable insights into using AI in practice, from robotics all the way to financial engineering. In a good way, right? It's CBA, yeah. And Ros Harvey, as you can see, she is was the founder of The Yield, and she really focused on how to help farmers make faster, better decisions. Dan is actually a closet physicist, right? Just to give him a bit of credibility, okay? And in this crowd, okay? And he's the Chief Decision Officer at CBA, and you would all know that CBA is in I think last year the top 5, and now the top 3 AI leaders globally. So that's pretty extraordinary. And Salah Sukkarieh is our kind of token roboticist, aren't you? Does amazing stuff, and also related to what Ros does in agronomy. So we're going to get started. And the way this panel is going to run is that each panelist has 5 minutes, and I need you to help me keep them honest, okay? Because once you wind them up, it's quite hard to shut them down. And no slides, but just 5 minutes to introduce themselves and their perspective and point of view on AI. And then we'll settle into a few panel questions, and then we will have 10 minutes of Q&A. So please start thinking about your questions early on, because we want to fill that 10 minutes. So, Ros, you like to go first?
A quick bit of background about myself and The Yield and AI. So The Yield was a technology company I founded in 2014, focusing in agriculture. And it was a very early AI business, and we were focusing on microclimate weather predictions to use in agriculture to combine with agronomy knowledge, but also later we grew it into doing microclimate predictions that farmers could use to make better decisions about how to grow their crops, from irrigation to when to fertilise, when to harvest. And then we grew the product more into predicting yield as well. So we did 2 things. I sold the business last year to Yamaha Agriculture, and at the same time they bought a robotics company, and Salah and I have worked together for many years as well, so that we could stitch together the data and close the loop. So if you can imagine, we're predicting the sort of things that you should do to grow crops more efficiently, that you then predicting the yield, but if you can add the data that robots actually see and what they do, and you can automate, you can close the loop with data, which allows you to create more powerful AI models. So we were a very early innovator out of Tasmania. So our colleague Franco here, they worked together back in Hugh in those days. And The Yield holds now the patent in both Australia, US, Europe, Singapore, major markets, for using AI to predict microclimates. And it's a very foundational underlying technology. We were granted the patent, the application date was 2016, so a long time ago. So since then, I'm now president of the Australian Conservation Foundation, which is what I'm doing post The Yield, having sold the business. I advise Yamaha strategically. I'm president of the Australian Conservation Foundation, and I'm also have the right to take the underlying technology into other verticals, which I'm experimenting with. So, look, I was asked about what were the big challenges of this in the real world, of which there are very many, particularly in agriculture, which is a particularly challenging sector. Salah and I both know that. But I think the really headline thing I'd say is, look, CSIRO says right now today, 80% of AI projects fail. Some other folks say 95% fail. Why? people don't know what they're trying to achieve. You know, what is the actual impact commercially? They don't have the data, and I work in quantitative AI, not in, you know, general language models. And getting the data in the right format structure so that it's actually AI ready is an enormous challenge. And it doesn't, I don't care which sector it is, from finance, which is very digitally mature, through to aviation, through to agriculture is probably the least digitally enabled. It's very, very difficult. But the other is just the human side. A lot of organisations are just not ready. And when I say not ready, not only is it data, it's their people. And at the end of the day, in my experience, the technology's the easy bit. The hard bit is the organisational and the people bit. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm out there for AI, and there will be a lot of money spent, and there will be a lot of failed projects if we're not very, very careful about how we focus it on solving real problems with real people that are capable of being adopted. And the final thing I want to say is we also need to be very mindful about the cost and the environmental impact. And this comes from bitter experience in terms of the cost. Because at the moment, the industry is being really driven by the major vendors who have no interest whatsoever in reducing cost. And effectively, what this means is that they're encouraging, I think, architectures and data management strategies that are not optimising for cost effectiveness. And I like to say that, you know, you can choose three things. You can choose flexibility, you can choose performance, or you can choose cost when you're actually engineering. And what happens is the vendors don't care about cost. Flexibility is great because it drives up the compute and the amount of data that you're using, but it's very bad for customers and very bad for startup businesses. And it's also very bad for the environment, because we know that every one of those ChatGPT, you know, queries drives 2 watts of power and half a litre of water in data centre costs. And this is going to have potentially a very significant impact on our energy use, our net zero transition. You know, AMIO is predicting it could get to 80% of our data use could be taken up with energy from data centres, which is a really big issue. Now, these things are solvable because technology is human mediated and we get to choose. And so we can choose the way we architect, the way we design, the way we use technology that both solves for our community, and I'm a techno-optimist, I love data, I love technology, I love AI, but I think we've got to be very mindful in the way that we do it in the environmental, social and economic benefits and impacts.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I was winding up.
I did threaten to bring a water pistol along, which is what they do at Stanford, and it really works. Okay, Dan, what have you got? I mean, there's a lot to dig in from what Ros was saying. I'm sure you're all realising that she is a sort of a, I don't know, have you ever been described as a volcano ready to erupt? No. Okay, good. Let's go, Dan.
I mean, I have frequently. I'll stand up to the limited extent that will help people in the back. Hi everybody, I'm Dan, I'm from the Commonwealth Bank. We care a lot about responsible AI and trust and accuracy, and have to correct a few things. We're fourth, not third, and it's just in financial services. I'm also not a closet physicist, I'm a failed physicist, but it's a shame. I was quite good for a while there. So I'll talk about finance broadly. I am a representative of the Commonwealth Bank as well, and I was reminded of that as I walked in casually. I didn't know where this place was. I didn't realise it was quite so grand. I feel terribly underdressed. Also dangerously dressed, because if you can squint closely, this does say powered by Combank AI. And as soon as the first person who spoke to me realised I worked for Combank, wanted to know a lot about a lot of things that I do not know an awful lot about. I think it's important to understand one fundamental principle in AI is that it is evolving so quickly. It's very, very complicated and it's very multifaceted. And I've been working in it now for a very long time, and I would say there's still a huge amount of unknowns about almost every aspect of it. Notwithstanding that, maybe it's worth explaining a little bit about who I am, where I've come from, and why I'm standing here today, and what I want to talk about. So as you can probably tell from the exotic accent, I'm from old South Wales. I grew up in Cardiff, in Wales, and I went to a family where nobody had ever been to university. I did do physics at university. I thought I'll do the hardest subject at the hardest college I can get into. I was doing quantum physics, and then I did a PhD which I subsequently abandoned in computing to do a startup, technology startup. That went quite well. We sold that. And I ended up in a bank, in the Royal Bank of Scotland in the UK, and subsequently here in Combank, where I've been for 8.5 years. Very pleased to say I'm a citizen of Australia now. And growing up, Dan would never in a million years have thought, well, I'll end up in a bank. Actually, whilst I was being a failed physicist at university, I did an internship at an investment bank. Not for me, ever again. No, that's not a place I want to spend any time. And yet, as I look back now where I am now, that I feel an unbelievable sense of pride and privilege that I got to work at CBA when I got to, and incredibly proud to talk to mum and dad about what I did. And I think it's important to recognise that banks are not necessarily the most obvious place to do AI, certainly not to do it quickly. It's certainly not a glamorous place. It's not always a popular place, as I discovered with that first conversation. But it is an important place. We all, almost everybody, if not everybody in this room, has a bank account. Many of you will have had mortgages, loans. You'll, have insurance policies and so forth. It's a vital part of the fabric of society, and it's vital that we encourage people who care about that society and that community to be a part of the conversation on AI. When I joined 8.5 years ago, our CEO, Matt Common, who was then the retail CEO, had this idea of the customer engagement engine. And the idea was predicated that we would serve our customers well. We just try and be better for them. It's apocryphally one of the most sort of, brief business cases in history. It's sort of like the stories have grown in terms of myth, but it's like written on the back of a napkin, just do good stuff for customers and trust me. But it's kind of true. Like, I was never asked to do anything other than do good things for customers. And we thought about our multi-channel approach, with customers in branch and call center, huge numbers of customers coming to us in digital. How do you stay relevant? How do you be helpful? And it turned out that AI was a really critical part of that story because it allowed us to just, try to apply meaningful interactions at a scale that simply wouldn't be possible without that kind of technology. So over the course of that, we've stayed into all sorts of really complicated aspects of AI and how you get it to scale. We've made mistakes, we've made breakthroughs, but we've done some incredible things that simply would not have been possible without applying AI with a purpose-driven workforce. We've returned $1.3 billion to customers through our Benefits Finder tool. We've dramatically increased the speed at which we can respond to emerging bushfire activities. AI plays a critical role in all of these things. Moreover, the way in which we're able to defend our customers from the rising scourge of fraud and scams is absolutely critically underpinned by AI. The bad actors are using it. We have to be in a place where our communities can be defended. And I'm really proud for all the difficulties that we have to work in this industry, and I want to maybe explore some more of that within the Q&A. Thank you.
Brilliant, Dan. Yeah, I mean, it's great to have a leader like CBA, in that industry, leading. We need more leaders, right? And we've got little pockets everywhere, but we need to kind of scale and franchise very fast. So it's good to have CBA leading the way. And probably most people in this room have been or are customers of CBA. I think yeah. Okay, Sally.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Salah Sukkarieh from the University of Sydney. My background's in an area called field robotics, which is the application of robotics in outdoor environments. Just by the nature of being outdoors, environment changes, biology, geology, chemistry, etc. So the processes that we have to go through in developing these systems to work outdoors 24/7 in all weather conditions in different terrains is quite complex. Coming from the university, I generally focus on where we can kind of push the boundaries on many of the algorithms and the sensors and the systems that we have to build. In the context of what we're talking about here, if we have to look at it from that lens, we kind of think about it from a physical AI perspective. So how does AI work outdoors? How does AI work and is adaptable and changeable to how the environment changes as well? And there's lots of challenges around there. My particular background expertise, or the area that I like to focus on, is environmental robotics, and it's really into that extreme natural environment space that we work in. So we've done a lot of work in industry engagement with the use of robotics and AI and so forth with mining. Recently we just finished a project with the New South Wales Rural Fire Service on using AI and robotics in first response into bushfire scenarios. a lot of work in agriculture, both grains and wheat and horticulture, and exploring those different domains. And more recently into planetary systems as well, so rovers on planets and satellite systems, etc. So it's a wide range of activity there. When you look at robotics 20 years ago, the focus then was just how do you take a platform that already exists and is operating, and then add some computers on board, add some sensing on board, make it work, and you treat each one of those subsystems as individual units. So the navigation system will tell you something, the control system will do something, and the sensing system will perceive something out in the environment. Where robotics is going now, it's a lot more embedded. There's a lot more of that activity happening between the different subsystems. We're starting to realize that the way you move the robot or control the robot affects what you sense and how you sense, and that becomes important. That quality of information then dictates how well you're going to control the robot as well, so there's that underlying principle. I think one of the key areas, really novel areas that's being pushed at the moment now is in agriculture. The focus there on how the biology, so in one particular project we're looking at phenotyping, and in phenotyping you're looking at millimetre accuracy changes day in, day out on a platform that's bumping and moving around and slipping because of mud, and there's quite a lot of complexity around there. In another project with the cattle industry, with the grazing livestock industry, it's a much more complex scenario where you're dealing with changes in pasture but also moving animals. And what we're trying to do with this system is also couple the farmer response and the agronomist response into that. So you get a much more complex picture of not just hard data and AI systems that can work with data, but also soft data. So as we mentioned before, like large language models and how they interact with each other in that form. So these are some of the things, and the challenges that we're seeing as we go forward is lots and lots of data coming through now. Processing that information, trying to do it in real time. And so starting to ask questions as to whether or not you keep pushing down the AI path or whether there's other spreads. For example, optimal sampling in the environment may get you better returns than worrying about large collection of data, and how does that work within that operational context. So these are some of the kind of questions that we're asking as well. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Ooh, very good. So I'm sure that ending on that point, it's not lost on the audience, the connection between, the importance of collecting the right data and the smart toilet that we were talking about in the last session, right? And, consider the toilet with arms and legs and robotic capability, yeah? So now we've got to try and find some common ground here. We've got a few threads happening, but across all of these domains, robotics, digital agronomy, and finance, where has AI really delivered value? Okay, and if you could also identify one or two blockers that you had to get over. So, where's the value, and what are the blockers?
I've been told to speak. Lots of places where we've certainly added value. I think if you, like I said, I've been at Commonwealth for 8.5 years, been doing AI for most of that time. Lots of different ways that we've spoken publicly about what we're doing with AI for our customers. I think certainly if you fast forward to today, one of the things that we've talked about recently that's really powerful is in terms of fraud and scams. I alluded to it earlier. Customer losses to fraud and scams for CB, I think I'm right in saying, from a high in 2022 have been reduced by 76%. It's a whopping amount of money. Now, there's still a lot of fraud and scams out there. We can't be complacent. We're dramatically reducing impact to customers, one of the things that we're most passionate about. And actually one of the most interesting use cases I've seen recently of generative AI, a lot of the AI that we started with was predictive. Effectively the bank, all banks really are largely predicated on prediction. You try and work out if you should loan to a customer, and you try and work out where you should set your price points and so forth. Even fraud detection is looking at anomalous behaviour and trying to work out if it's dodgy anomalous behaviour or just someone's doing something a little unusual. The generative AI use case, and it's a great story for Australia too. We partner with a local startup called Academies to use synthetic agents for scam baiting effectively. So you'll have all heard scam calls, people purporting to be from a large online retailer, let's say, and saying somebody's been using your account and try and dupe you into giving you your details. What we've been using is 10,000 synthetic fake CBA customers who now using generative AI can very believably in real time speak to a real scammer and keep them on the line for a long time. They think they're speaking to an actual Commonwealth customer that they're just about to defraud. Actually, they're wasting their time. The record is, I think, 52 minutes so far. It's very good. We're always trying to beat that. And, you know, in one simple sense, every second that guy spends on the phone to a non-real customer is a second that he's not spending on a real customer, really trying to dupe somebody. But much more powerfully, the intelligence that we gather about how, you know, these criminal gangs are organising themselves, how the scams evolve over time, this is something that's dramatically increased our ability to be reactive. And that's an example of kind of how we're able to use today's technology, really advanced technology, predicated on a long history of building the muscle to build AI safely in a heavily regulated, you know, environment, in a large corporate entity that wouldn't traditionally be thought of as a place that you could do very rapidly adaptive technology. I think you mentioned hurdles. I will just say very briefly that, you know, none of this is supposed to be easy. We'd like it to be, but, you know, corporate transformations are always hard. I think there was nothing that we couldn't overcome, but there was nothing that wasn't challenging, and the challenges persist today. You can't be complacent about it. The space still evolves. If I think about what did we do that was really important, it was around trust, governance, risk, transparency, thinking long-term about how AI would evolve, and did we have the structures and the procedures and the tooling in place to give us confidence that we could do that at our scale.
That's really great. As I listen to you, I'm thinking, okay, are you already developing the strategy for when the bad actors have their own synthetic agent attackers?
Let's be real, that's already here, right?
Yeah, it's already, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, the you know, domains like cyber and fraud and scams are you know, really at the front line of kind of what's happening with AI, because the, you know.
Okay, great. Ros, what do you think?
Yeah, trying to sell is actually a very good indicator of what actually has value. And so I originally came out of a university, and there's a world of difference between a proof of concept and a concept than actually the brutal reality of actually running a commercial business, of having to hit revenue targets. So with some confidence, I can tell you in agriculture, the single biggest value is reducing labour costs. That is the thing that is the holy grail that everyone is looking for, and they're looking for Salah's robots. The problem is very few of them, particularly in horticulture. It's different in broadacre, but we both worked in horticulture. The technology is behind the demand. Where the part of the business I came from, which is basically quantitative AI, there's two ways you look at it. Something that reduces cost and something that creates value. So I'll use a very concrete example, yield prediction. So yield prediction, why does it matter? If you're running a big operation, say wine, and we had Treasury is one of our biggest customers, multi-billion-dollar listed company. We only worked with large companies because they're the only ones who had the data. You know, the little farmers did not have the data for us to be able to access. So the value is massive. It's documented, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars per hectare. Because if you don't get it to the winery at the right time, it goes off. So you've got to pick it at the right time. It's this massive logistics problem of getting the right grey wine at the right time into the winery. It's a massive labour cost. You've got to move people around to pick it and get it in. And then you've got to also deal with longer term forecasting around what are your blends going to be to mix the market. So knowing up to 12 months in advance what the actual yield is going to be using AI at the block level, which we do very well, is really a lot of value. But the only thing I could ever sell it on was I'm going to get rid of the cost of sampling. Because what they do at the moment, they wander around and they actually hold a frame out in the field and count flowers. And then they use a model developed by researchers to actually, you know, basically a mathematical model to project. And then they do it twice because it's expensive, so they can only do it twice. And the cost of doing that, we could sell doing it using AI, so using satellite, weather, and their historical data. We could do it for less than that, than they could do it themselves, and then everything else was upside. And that is what is sold at. The reason it's very important is when you in the real world try to actually get someone to take this technology on, if you say to a customer, I'm going to create you all this value, what happens is up the line, to their employers, push down on them and say, great, you're going to create all that value, I'm going to cut your budget. Because now you're going to actually have all this extra revenue and extra value and you're going to do it cheaper, I'm going to cut your budget. Not surprisingly, they're not very enthusiastic about that. So it really is really important when you go into the reality of doing this is to really understand, particularly for a startup, of how you do that. I think it's different in large corporates, because I'm now working in other kind of logistics and travel industries, where they can more flexibly deal with value creation, for example, reducing stress and things like that. But if you're in a startup business trying to sell an AI product, I think cost is the big driver.
Yeah, and I think all universities really focus on innovation and entrepreneurship now. You know, when I left university way back, I won't even tell you what decade, it was a hurdle-to-learned program. It wasn't actually a course, but you couldn't get your degree without it. And I think, you know, we're really moving very quickly to a world where, you know, you don't get any degree of any kind without understanding the process of innovation and all those things that you're saying. So that's going to be good.
One thing I will say, I think in this audience in particular, that it's a challenge managing researchers, because we worked a lot with UTS and I've worked with Pascal in the past, with NICTA, and researchers want to push the boundaries of innovation because that's what you're rewarded for. You get publications and all those things. But often the people who want impact, which is different, actually, they just want one step better than where I am. And this creates a tension when you're trying to do both.
Yeah, a creative tension though. Come on.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Salah.
I think universities want to create impact too, so I think it's just a different form of it. But I think if you look at robotics and how it's formed over the years, as I mentioned before, regardless of whether you're working in, say, a bushfire setting or an agriculture setting or an environment rehabilitation setting, and you throw these robots out there, the first thing that was always worked on was just to automate the platform, just to make it work, go up and down, do whatever it might be. Where AI, maybe if I could just call it machine learning for a little bit first, so where machine learning really helped was allowing these platforms to now understand and perceive their environment, to kind of understand it's a tree, this terrain I can drive over, something's moving in front of me that I need to avoid. So that perception role and how machine learning allowed you to kind of collect all that information, detect things, whether they're stationary or moving, and then determine how to navigate around that became a big thing. And over probably, for maybe 10 years, there was a lot of effort and a lot of work in that space. Over the last maybe 5 years, the value of machine learning in the control space, so how you then control the platform optimally and accurately, is really gaining a lot of momentum. So now, and what I mean by that is the task space of a robot can now open up a lot more. It can do a lot more things because now you can learn the policies and the parameters that you want to go through. Where we're coming to now is probably in two areas of high value. One is the interaction of those two things together, so machine learning and perception, machine learning and planning, control, and how they come together and work as a dynamic system. When you start to see those systems work and operate, you start to see what you think is intelligence in some way. It's doing something, it's reacting, it's behaving in a certain way, it's doing it optimally, etc. And it can considerably adapt and change. And the other part is the interaction between the human and these robots. So, working with firefighters or working with the farmer or working with the conservationist and trying to say, you've got this platform, it's like an extension of a Google search into the physical environment. These robots are going out there doing things. How do you interact in natural language? How does that process into real data? How does that come back to you as natural language? So you get that synergy through that. Probably the challenge, to the second part of the question, the challenge we're finding is when you throw into the natural environment, one of the biggest infrastructure parts that you miss is communication systems. So connecting up to the cloud is not an easy thing to do. And so how do you get these machine learning models to actually operate on small embedded systems in the platforms, operate in real time, and grab that data and be able to do those tasks in real time as well?
Okay, well, riffing on your answer, because I think it's great that you raised that interface between human and AI or robot. So if we start thinking about really agentic and autonomous systems or agents or robots, okay, what can we just outsource to them now, just with some guardrails and a few tripwires? So what are you comfortable actually letting these technologies do end-to-end all by themselves? Or what have you seen out there? We'll start with you, Dan.
Sure. First thing to say, I think, is there's a lot of ambiguity about what one even means by agentic and or autonomous. But I can talk to some specific examples within the bank, which I think gets the essence of what you're asking about, which is, to what extent do you allow AI machine learning systems to do things without intervention? I talked about the fact that we've been doing AI for a long time at Commonwealth. We're in a very heavily regulated industry, so everything we do, quite rightly, gets scrutinized very heavily. And so one of the fundamental principles around that is accountability. So I'll explain a couple of systems in which things are happening, autonomously, I think, in the way that you describe, but it's important to be very, very clear that there is a human who's accountable for that system and checking that it works, and if something goes wrong, it's that person that has to explain why, not the system. One very obvious one from the very first large-scale AI system that we introduced, the customer engagement engine. So to, again, very quickly recap, this is if you're a customer of the Combank, we're attempting to work out if you come into the branch, you come to the call center or use the app, what's the best, most relevant thing that we could talk to you about, or what are you likely to want from us? We're trying to be relevant. We can never get that 100% right, but we use AI to try and figure it out. And there are hundreds of things the bank could be talking to you about, or you may want to talk to us about. It could be, you want to change your credit card, I don't know, you want to take out a home loan, you want to close your account, it could be anything. So we have several hundred of those. And each one of those we have several machine learning algorithms trying to work out the propensity and the likelihood based on lots of different things. And the customer may be eligible for lots of those conversations. So the AI is trying to work out, of all the things that you're eligible for, which is the one that's most likely to be relevant. And if we can get that right more often than not, it's a better customer experience than just doing it randomly, which is what most companies would have to do. Those algorithms are running autonomously in the self-learning based on customer feedback. And
in real time?
Yes, in real time.
Okay.
And that was the very first, again, it feels strange to say it, really, because I think people think about this as sort of science fiction, right at the cutting edge. No, 8-9 years ago.
Well, I don't know how you're going to get from 4 to 1 now if you're already doing that.
I know, the bar is very high. But the self-learning algorithms, and the power of that is, we saw it during COVID. So people talk correctly a lot. We think a lot about the risks of AI, because there are lots of risks associated with a technology that's evolving so quickly and so complex. But what we found in the implementation is, and this is not an accident, it's by design, where we implement AI is reducing risks that we hold. At least that's what we're attempting to achieve at all points. And this is a great example. So we have this autonomous self-learning system. We have lots and lots of automated checks and balances, by the way. And during COVID, the one that, one of the principles underlying it is kind of customer channel preference. And we saw, a couple of days where the model started to really drift in terms of expected behavior. And some of that was to do with channel preference kind of stuff. And our alerts kicked in, bing, 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 there's something a bit wrong here. Maybe a data feed hasn't turned up. We default back to older models if it goes out of kind of...
Is one of your metrics how many millions of dollars you lose when they make a mistake?
It absolutely is not. Although I would imagine that would get scrutinised quite closely.
No, hey, that might be a good one to introduce.
Yeah.
Okay, Ros, what about you?
I think we probably do it customer-facing and then internal. On the internal, the only way you can make this technology scale is, particularly in what we do, is automating the process, AutoML, to actually create the models and results, because it's way too expensive to have high labour costs, particularly the cost of data scientists. So we have an automated ML environment, and that is supervised, because obviously you need to have serious alerting set up on this, and you need to be able to constantly measure your own accuracy of the models, which is part of the alerting system. But we have sort of detailed feature sets that we've developed through lots of contextual learning, and then we have AutoML environment that just trawls through different models, different combinations to actually come up with new model results. So that's sort of internally focused, if you like, and we're increasingly using AI for coding internally. But then on the external, I think we're basically at an automated system with supervision from automated supervision and accuracy checking in yield prediction and weather prediction. So it actually operates, it's supervised in the sense that you've got an alerting system that tells a human if things are going off outside.
What's the worst thing that can go wrong?
The worst thing, well, we're not in an industry where someone dies if we get it wrong. And I think that is obviously a really big issue if you're in aviation.
So it's not death. What else?
What would go wrong? Well, for example, if you are doing weather prediction for thinning for a crop, you apply a chemical that, a hormone, which basically, if you've got too many little apples on a tree, and you're trying to get the right amount of apples on it for the season, so you're not unnecessarily using in inputs that are going to give you too many apples, at the end of the day are going to be too small, so they're not helpful. What the growers do is they apply a product that actually strips effectively to get you to the target number of apples. If it has to be applied in a particular window, because if you don't get the window of the right temperature and humidity right, it's a little bit like napalming a tree. That is catastrophic. You can lose a whole season if you get it wrong.
Wow.
And so it is actually quite important to get it right, and you'd want to have a lot of confidence. You need to be careful on what your use cases are and what your risks are and what your confidence in your model are to do that. So yeah, you can have pretty bad commercial impact.
The idea that you can ahead of time specify how many apples you're going to allow this tree to
that is
grow.
very, very known science.
Yeah,
just,
okay.
You know, it's developed by biologists.
Okay, I have more respect for apples.
It's more the getting the weather prediction right,
yep.
because you know our weather are on these big global forecasting systems, rich countries like Australia, then we add weather stations and we grid down, and maybe you're going to get to a 4x4 kilometre grid, where we use AI to predict inside the growing tunnel, inside the canopy, inside very, very specifically what the plant is experiencing. And you can only do that, you know, you're doing weather every 15 minutes, you're generating new predictions that are going out for every variable, you know, massively out, you know, up to 10 days. And you're running this all through models. You have to automate this. You just cannot do this any other way. And so that's where, you know, there are significant risks. Now, what that means commercially is you might choose not to release a product that says, apply this chemical in this window. You might say, what I'm going to tell you is what our best model estimate of these conditions are, and it's a decision support, not an automated system. But with time, it will become automated, but I think we need these feedback loops so that you can effectively ground truth by what you're seeing.
Yeah, that's great. Salah?
Yeah, I think I'll just go off the back of that, Ross, because it was a good point that you made at the end. I think when we used to apply AI systems, they were just black boxes, machine learning systems were just black boxes. And as you know, the research over the last few years has done a couple of things. One is developing new machine learning algorithms that also predict the level of certainty of their result as well, and that became an important element because now the output wasn't just, here is the answer that I'm going to give you, but this is how confident I am about that answer. And to follow on the decision support tools, what that also meant was that if you kept running those algorithms, then what you gave the user was options and different levels of risk maybe, or different levels of uncertainty. So I think that was one part. The other part from the algorithm side has been recently how the machine learning algorithm makes decisions. So you're getting that output as well now, not just the final result, but what it's doing, what it's processing, why it reprocessed something, and that thought process that the algorithm itself goes through helps the end user. And so both of those situations has allowed the end user, the operator, to have a lot more confidence in the system for it to kind of behave on its own. In our applications, so fortunately in our lab we've been able to kind of work from TRL 1 all the way through to 9 in these different applications. And what you find as you get further and further up to TRL is some of those machine learning algorithms are not trusted by the end user for obvious reasons. A 400-ton truck on a mine site, 20-ton fire truck, you know, a 10-ton tractor, etc. You don't want these things running around, spraying anywhere or going off track. So they're not. And so what you end up having is machine learning algorithms and a change in operational behaviour. So the two things are starting to come together. Where I used to operate in this manner, but now because of these machine learning systems that are going to allow me to do something more cost effectively or repeatedly or whatever it might be, I will change the operation to allow that system to behave in that. So we're seeing those changes as well.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the next question with a little bit of a twist. And that is, you know, if we want to explore human AI human in the loop kind of adoption. Right. Since you're all, leaders and doing fantastic innovations, we want you to surprise us and give us an insight, an actionable one that we couldn't get out of ChatGPT. Okay? So something that is surprising because you found it unintuitive when you've been working and building these systems. What has just made you stop and think?
I've got one.
Okay, only one?
I've got many, but I've got one that I
Pick your best
find
one.
difficult to believe.
Okay.
And it comes actually going back to the day in oysters. We were actually predicting salinity level. Salinity is a proxy for the runoff of water, and because they're fresh filter animals, they basically, the health authorities say they set a salinity level as a proxy for runoff by catchment. Okay? So when they go over that salinity level, they stop harvesting. It's bad financially to do that. Anyway, we were running this we started off by just trying to monitor in real-time salinity, and we did this with CSIRO and Nick during the day, and that was very effective. And then the grower said, well, couldn't you tell us when it's going to actually be shut, i.e. predict, which actually was an important sort of innovation that we would predict, and this is 2016, earlier than that, 2014, and so we had a go. And we came up with a machine learning model to do this, to predict. The thing that really surprised us about after a year of doing this, we were taking the data feeds, like the rain was a critical thing, and wind, etc., and we were taking the live feed of the salinity and effectively building a model that would predict salinity from these environmental variables. And the feed went down. We continued to predict very successfully without the actual environmental variables. And I'm going to the data science, how can this be? I just don't understand this. Because, I was thinking about it as kind of like an offset thing. And the team said, look, at the end of the day, the best predictor of something is itself. And if you get enough data, and you're feeding the error rates back into the model, that it can actually predict itself. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing.
Oh, that's a really early insight.
We turned it off, but it actually continued to predict pretty accurately.
Okay, Dan, what do you think?
It's continually surprising, and that's both exciting and horrifying, depending on precisely which job you have. But even the example I was giving earlier, so the customer engagement and those models that were degrading, it turned out to be the earliest signs of people modifying their behaviour as a result of COVID. So it wasn't, the models weren't wrong, they were right. Our expectations were wrong. There was something happening at a macro level that the AI had kind of cottoned onto that we hadn't. And that was remarkable. That was not an intended consequence, that's not what the machine was for. But very pleased to see that it had, quote unquote, worked and, was accurately telling us what was happening out there. I think, maybe more recently, the way people are using the tooling and what it means, I suppose, is, it's evolving so quickly. If you'd asked me a couple of years ago, we would have said a lot of what's happening kind of, code generation AIs is very exciting. It's going to democratize things. It's going to lower the bar. We're going to have a lot more people being a lot more productive with coding. What we've actually found is it's gotten more sophisticated is actually the really elite engineers are being wildly more productive as a result. But actually the incremental benefits for an average coder are not really there in the same way. So rather than thinking about a world in which, we're going to have lots and lots more of these sort of engineer specialists, actually where we're getting the real value now is from folks out in lines of business, maybe in more sort of traditional areas of the bank, like risk management or in finance, who are creative problem solvers and deep thinkers, and that a lot of the very, very best use cases that we get are being driven from areas that we definitely wouldn't have seen even a year or so ago.
It's really interesting. Okay, Salah, you have the final word.
Maybe two examples very quickly, and both of them related to how the human, the end user, has reacted to the output of the system. One of was, and I'll take Ross's previous example around the Apple industry. We used to work on perception systems on robots that could identify and count every single flower down a row, and then build a flower density map across a whole paddock for an apple farm. And then 6 months later, you come back again and you do the same thing with detecting the individual apples. And so the idea being that longitudinal kind of study, that data collection allowed you to kind of predict yield as you're going through, so you keep going through that process. Really great farmer would stand up on top of the hill, look down at the paddock, look at the flower density approximately, and estimate how much yield they would get at the end of it all. And then we would go through the process and calculate the amount of yield as well, and we'd come within plus or minus 1%. So his estimates were perfect. And that showed that the machine learning algorithms could do it in real time and over that period of time, but you get roughly what the farmer was just predicting by looking at the paddock. The difference was we noticed that there were density changes across the different rows. And so he was very good repeatedly predicting the estimate of the yield, because he would look at the flowers and he would then just place the beehives for pollination purposes, and he would get the yield that he was predicting he would get. But you could then optimize where you placed the bee placements to get a greater yield, and that was not known up until that point. But there was a lot of reaction in terms of not wanting to do something. So I think that was one learning. The other one was work that we did with Qantas on flight path prediction and also fuel prediction, and trying to get optimal trajectories for the aircraft to fly given the wind. And that was another scenario where we were predicting behaviours of what the aircraft should fly, which looked completely different to the last 20 years of dispatching of flight plans and whatever it might be, and the reaction from that. So, but once they got over it, once the upper management forced the dispatchers to fly the routes that they were going through, we're getting routes going right over Antarctica, for example, following through paths that you would never follow across to the US. They were getting 1-2% fuel savings on these flights, which is quite significant. But again, another one where, from our perspective, we're applying machine learning and optimization algorithms, etc., to a problem. We kind of feel like it should do better, but then you've got, I don't want to call them the gatekeepers, but the individuals who are so used to certain behaviours and processes, and how they react to that result is quite novel.
Okay, well, I've got to apologise to the audience now, because I've clearly got 3 optimists here. Well, all we got was serendipity. We didn't hear about all the, disasters. But we're now going to turn to questions. Yes, hands are up. And so you have the opportunity to delve into more of those dark places. So, yep. If you could just say your name, and then if you want to address your question to all the panellists or any particular one.
Yeah, for sure. Nathan Kinch. I'm an AI ethicist working in the federal government at the moment. I think this is probably for you, Dan. So in 2019, our government published 8 AI ethics principles. And we have a body of work from, I think, 5th quadrant called the Responsible AI Maturity Index that looks at the relationship between effectively 500 and something organisations' stated commitments to the 8 principles versus how well they think they're operationalising those principles. And I just wanted to get a sense at CBA, how effectively do you think CBA is operationalising those 8 AI ethics principles, and what have been the main learnings, from the challenge of attempting to do that in the real world?
It's a great question, thank you. And yeah, we're familiar with the 5th quadrant stuff, and I've been through that process. I think it's a great piece of work, and actually, it's an involved answer, because we're obviously, I'm very proud of the work that the team does on responsible AI. At the same time, very much grounded in the fact that we're working very quickly into a space that's evolving very rapidly. We need to be on our toes, and I think it behooves us all to have a certain humility to it. And one of the things we've done is partner with a lot of very smart people externally. So yourselves, I see Bill over there as well, from Gradient Institute. There are many great academic and other industry partners that we very thoughtfully worked with, specifically because they have an independent and external lens on what we're doing. I think that's been really key. I think, I certainly would like to think that we invite and receive, and quite rightly so, a lot of scrutiny. Whenever I say I'm from combat, I'm going to get a lot of questions about it. It's okay, it's good, it should be that way. I think we're doing well. I certainly think that we've put a lot of our research agenda, we always have, we actually have a lot of really good muscle in this, into matters of transparency, unintended bias detection. This is really what our work was predicated on from the very start. So there's a lot of kind of well-honed expertise at managing risk well. There's a lot of execution muscle in risk and governance within the bank naturally. What do I think we could get better at, I think is probably a good question, or where do we need to evolve? Certainly, we're pushing very hard at innovation at the boundaries of some of the things that are happening in, say, agentic AI, for example. We're very excited. It's actually an example where we have other autonomous parts of processes running and we're seeing better customer outcomes. But we have an ambitious agenda. We know that as that scales, it becomes an ever more complex system. So the way that we're thinking about evaluation frameworks, other safeguards, the guardrail models that we've put in place for our customer-facing generative AI is something where we've done an enormous amount of work, but we think, as the models get smarter and smarter, the work that we have to do to keep them safe, it kind of becomes harder and harder too. So I think, pleased with where we are so far. In fact, in that Evident AI Index, we were ranked #1 in the world for responsible AI leadership, which is very good for Australia, I think. Australia in general, I think, has a great tradition and a name globally for responsible AI, and something that I think is...
Yeah, just no AI.
Yeah.
I'm glad somebody laughed. It was a joke. Okay. Yes. Oh. Do we have a microphone? Oh, you've got one. Okay.
I'm ahead of you. Graham Campbell, engineer. I was just reflecting, if we had this meeting 50 years ago, we would be talking exactly the same way about the start of the digital revolution. And what was interesting back then, because I actually started my career a bit before that, but what was interesting was that all the software had embedded assumptions, and that was, and of course, to understand the impact of these embedded assumptions was critical to understanding how you should use the software and in what particular case. Does that apply today in what we're talking about in terms of the embedded assumptions of all the software and tools that we use? Are these easily found and understood so that they can be used properly?
Wow. How much time do we have? Okay, who wants to go here? Who's the oldest? Okay.
If you want to gather your thoughts for something more erudite, I think it's a brilliant question, and no, I think it's a more fiendish challenge with AI than it was in the digital revolution. I think it's implicit in all kind of technological shifts. But I can give you maybe a really tangible example of some of the work that we've done with Combank, because we worry about that, right? We worry about large foundational models allow us to do incredible things, but they're trained on data we don't always know what, we don't always know how, and therefore we don't always know exactly what the outputs may be. So how can we answer or at least investigate some of these questions? We did a study, one of the very best parts of my job is when I get to work with our behavioral scientists and the human-centered AI work, and that's really not about the technology itself, but how people react around it and what it really means. And we did a study using large language models. This is a very learned audience, so most, if not all of you, will be familiar with Daniel Kahneman and Thinking Fast and Slow and prospect theory, and lots of well-published studies about what people will do if you say there's a 50% chance of you getting $5 or a 1% chance of you getting $1,000, and people will make irrational, quote-unquote irrational choices about that. And we thought, well, I wonder what LLMs will do. So we thought we created a survey. We surveyed 1,000 real Australians. We created 1,000 personas like the real Australians. And we asked them the questions, the survey questions, for this very repeatable, very, very frequently run study that always gives roughly the same results. And the results are remarkable. So we ran it in the first question, almost identical responses, right? The Australians answered it the same way everyone always answers it. The LLMs answered it the same way everyone always answers it. And then we asked question 2. And I think this was a mistake. The team tell me they did this deliberately, but they got the numbers wrong by a factor of 1,000, right? And so the real Australian people answered in a wildly different way to what the traditional survey would say, but the LLMs answered in exactly the same way as the non-mistakey version would. And really, it's a really visceral example of how easily we can be duped into thinking that, well, this is a reflection of society, and the LLM is humanity talking back. Well, kind of, but also kind of not. Yeah. Okay,
we've only got seconds left. So, do you have anything to add, Salah?
No, I think I was just reflecting over the processes again, and I mean, there's a lot more software being written now, And so there's a lot of activity happening, and you kind of think you're on your favourite model, and then next week there's a new model, and you think, okay, we've got to try that one because for whatever reason we've got to keep up with the curve and get that going. But the same processes still lie. You know, from requirements and all the way through, and anything you write, you kind of bring that through. When it comes to machine learning, usually we're asking the questions such as what is the data that's being fed in that goes to that learnt model, and we're a little bit more controlled in the sense that we have that control to be able to do something like that. I think it's the LLMs that we're a little bit, there's a lot more uncertainty around that. And even in the context of the research of applying that into, not so much doing research on LLMs, but using them in the research context, there's a lot of questions still there around, well, how, you know, what data was it trained on, and how can I use it in that context? That's probably where the greatest uncertainty is at the moment.
Okay, well, let's wrap up, but I'd like you all to identify one skill NextGen needs to thrive in this world we're rapidly entering.
Co-designing.
Co-designing, nice, I like that. You stole Dan's because he's got the human-centered AI t-shirt. Ros?
Communication.
Communication.
And that means listening as well.
Okay, okay, you gathered a lot of things in communication, sort of everything. Okay, Dan?
Creativity.
Creativity. Okay, well, there you have it. Thank you so much for our stupendous panel. You have been amazing. Thank you.